Hey, Guy, how are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I thought it might be fun for us to just spend a couple minutes, kind of recapping the things that we talked about in our question episode, episode 54, where we talked about common misconceptions in design
hmm
systems. And there were so many, Guy, that we saw in the answers. And I just thought, we talked about maybe two. I think we only really had time to cover two or three of those. But I just wanted to kind of like, after a day after the session, kind of come back to you and say, is there anything that stuck with you from the deeper conversation that we had with the community around this?
I think the first thing that stood out is something we noticed right out of the gate, where there was no one who said no. My consumers have no misconceptions about the design system.
Yeah. And there were many. And one of the things I found really impactful just in the conversation is at the beginning, we kind of talked about this recognition that our understanding about design systems is definitely a journey. We probably had a lot of these misconceptions ourselves, right?
hmm
So I love the idea of sort of remembering that, hey, everybody is coming to this with a different set of experiences, and those experiences actually help us broaden our own perspectives. But we shouldn't be judgmental with folks who have these kinds of misconceptions. Just
hmm
let's work to find ways to help them move beyond those. So that I think was a really important sort of foundational part of the conversation for me, at least. Um, I'm thinking about one in particular. We kind of started with this idea of coverage as like a category of misconception, right?
Yeah.
And I think there were many folks who shared that others in their organization had this idea, this assumption that the design system would cover everything the product teams might need in their
hmm
work. Um, and even beyond that, there were statements like, if the system doesn't have something that the product team needs, they're actually a blocker to our success, right?
Exactly.
So I think those kinds of statements are so common, in the work. And I didn't know if you've had any experiences like that. Like, is that was a common one for you, or?
Yeah, that was actually when we started working on our current design system. That was one of the first things I've heard. Like, we cannot use the design system because you're blocking us because you don't have everything we need. And thinking about this, I think a lot of those misconceptions that we talked about, they don't necessarily come from any sort of malicious intent. A lot of times they come from something that you have no control over, and that is the way that leadership sold the idea of a design system. And I'll give you another example. We talked about misconceptions around accessibility and the role of the design system in that. And we talked about one common misconception that if you use a design system, you don't need to worry about accessibility anymore. It's going to cover everything. And again, that happened to us. And I know it came because someone sold this, hey, you should use this design system because it will help you not think about accessibility. And it's something that we never said that. But the people who are consuming it, someone told them that. Why would they not believe that? They have no reason not to.
Yeah, that's such a common one. And I think, the idea that there's sort of work to do on all of the topics, all of the benefits of a system, right? There's work to do from every part of the org to make those a reality. It's not
hmm
just purely 100% on the system team to make the org more efficient, right? Everybody has to play a part in that. So I think that that's true with accessibility, that's true with efficiency, that's true with cohesion and consistency, all of those things that we hope to see from our systems. One that we didn't spend a ton of time on was this idea of roles. Like, I
Mm.
think a lot of folks expressed that others in the org had an assumption or a misconception that the design system is for the designers, or the design system is really kind of a component library for the engineers, or quality even is just the job of the design system team, which means I don't have to think about it, as a product or feature practitioner. Any experience you have or insight you have in that? Have you had to deal with that one?
So it's in previous companies, yes, but usually it's a matter of where the design system team lives within the organization and who it includes. Because we have a completely cross functional team that has both. I technically live in the design organization, but we have a dedicated design system engineering team. So we have a very unified front in that sense. And we've always talked about it as both something that is for designers, but ultimately it's for products.
Yeah.
But I've worked in companies where it was a design initiative, and engineering could not care less about that.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying, if I was trying to sort of like synthesize that down, is that having a cross-discipline team is one way to sort of combat this kind of role-based misconception around design systems.
It does, because that's essentially the company is funding, right? Work for design and for engineering, and saying, like the company itself says, this is something that is intended for those audiences.
Yeah, and even beyond design and engineering, right? Like having
Of
product
course.
ownership involved, having our QA folks. I mean, there's like so many roles that are played in the product space that I do think we would find a lot of value from them if they were more involved in the system work we're doing too. So I love that. Okay, one more here that I want to touch on that we didn't get a chance to in the deep dive. I'd love to talk about this one because it just made me laugh as I was going through the answers. The category we gave it was flexibility versus rigidity. And we had a series of answers from folks who were describing the misconceptions of their consumers or stakeholders. And they said those folks believed the design system is too flexible to be useful. In other words, it doesn't have a strong enough opinion for me to like really use it in some way. And then there was a whole other group from our answers that said the design system is too rigid to allow for innovation. And so this sort of presented to me like, oh my gosh, we have these wide ends of a spectrum of misconceptions, right? Some people think it's too flexible. Some people think it's too rigid. It's a little Goldilocks, it's like, I want the porridge in the middle. Have you experienced these two extremes? And like, what have you done about this?
So I've never experienced it's too flexible.
Yeah.
It's always been, it's too rigid. And even beyond that, it not only is it too rigid, but it's too rigid and there's nothing I can do about it, so I'm not going to use it.
Almost like a feeling of helplessness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's I think that is the kind of a symptom of something bigger. I understand if people have these misconceptions. Happens to everyone. But I think the fact that we don't know about some of those things means that they never voiced that. And they just kept it to themselves, and then they 9 times out of 10 do not use a design system because they have this misconception and they think, okay, I'm stuck. There's nothing I can do. It's a done deal.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't know any design system team that isn't open to that feedback and open to working with the consumers and to make things better for them, right?
Yeah.
And that is the missed opportunity, the real missed opportunity here, which is people feel stuck and they don't feel they have the agency to do something about it.
Yeah. And I think historically, we've gone through a season where maybe we were a little too gung-ho on the control side of being systems practitioners, right? And I can see clearly in my conversations with so many systems practitioners that the last year to 2 years has been a season for us of adjusting our posture inside organizations, of working really hard to be more approachable by those teams, and almost just saying like, look, we're on the same team. We want to support you, but we have to build relationships to do that. So I love what you're saying here, because I do think letting the rest of the org know, hey, we're here to help, like come talk to us, come engage with us, I think that's really, really powerful. And that actually leads us into what I would love to kind of wrap up with, which is, and honestly, Guy, we were so deep into all these different misconceptions in the deep dive, we didn't get a ton of time to talk about what do we do about it,
Yeah.
So like, what would you say to somebody who's listening to this and they're like, oh my gosh, I have all of these misconceptions. Nobody in my org really understands what I'm trying to do. I don't have clarity on the mandate. And I just want to create clarity. Like what is there like 1 or 2 things you would recommend to folks?
So we talked briefly in the session about having taking all these misconceptions that people sent and basically move them to a document that has like a wiki page of here are all the misconceptions and here's the actual truth about them. Which is I think it's a great start. But we both know that having something written somewhere for a design system doesn't really guarantee that anyone is going to read it.
Right.
And this is where I would say community outreach is really important. Like for us, for example, we are very lucky. My team is very lucky to have a dedicated researcher, and she goes out and she talks to designers, she talks to engineers to uncover some of those issues and things that they have and how happy they are or not with the design system. And that helped us uncover a lot of those things that we talked in a session. And but then also that leads to, like, some of them are very easy to solve and say, hey, actually, you know what? The thing you thought you can do, it's very easy, and here's how you do it. That is simple enough. But sometimes you need to just go and meet with them and say, hey, show us what's not working. Let's figure it out together. I think that you investing time in sitting down, if it's half an hour or an hour, I know it's like we're all very busy and we have a backlog of a billion things. But investing that half an hour with sitting with someone is going to eliminate so much noise, and that person will become more likely to come to you in the future.
Yeah, I love that. It's such an engaging approach to just say, like, let's actually sit down and work through a problem you have. You have this assumption, you have this misconception, or you just have this idea. We can do that. We can sit down. I tried to categorize some of the things because actually in the question this week, we asked people to tell us, like, what are you doing about these misconceptions? How are you addressing this? And there were so many answers that I felt fell into like these kind of primarily two categories. One was very sort of education focused. Like a lot of people talked about trainings, workshops, like blogging, like actively sort of more actively writing to the community, maybe newsletters, onboarding activities, announcements in Slack or Teams or wherever they have those kind of conversations, lots of stuff like this. And I thought, that's great. That reminded me of sort of the job it takes as a leader to cast a vision is similar in my mind in some ways, because it's kind of like, by the time you state your values or cast your vision like the 12th or 15th or 50th time, you're just like, oh my gosh, everybody knows this. They're going to think it's like a broken record. But the truth is they only hear it so very rarely from us, And so the same thing's kind of true here, where it's like, probably to be successful at this, we're going to feel like we're stating these things that are so obvious to us over and over and over again. But the truth is our consumers, our stakeholders are really only going to hear that a handful of times. And they probably need to hear it that many times just for it to sink in, So I think over communication, is key. So that's that education side. The other one was, I just put under engagement, right? It was a little bit more like two-way, like working sessions where we're actually solving problems together, or co-creation, I think is what a session is what somebody called it. Champion roles where we've got somebody who's out in, like you describe your researcher, maybe a little bit kind of like that, but maybe on the product design or engineering side, somebody doing that, running more like clinics. So there were so many good solutions in the answers. And I felt like a lot of teams are trying to do these things, but they don't have what you have, right? Which is like a dedicated researcher to go work on this. So you're in like a very privileged position there. What do you say to a team it's one or two people and they feel all this tension around the misconceptions and they just don't have time to go do that kind of thing? What would you say to them?
Yeah. It's tough because it's really hard to scale that with, if you're one person or two people, and I definitely know I'm very privileged to be to have a large team.
Sure.
I think the question is, as always, ruthless prioritization. If this is something, if these misconceptions is something that's inhibiting your design system from reaching its potential, it becomes something you have to address, and you have to like put it at your top priority. And you maybe you don't do one-on-one sessions because those are really hard to scale, right, as one person. But maybe you say, hey, I'm going to take this product today and I'm just going to meet with them for 1 hour and hear their problems and see what's going on there. And of course, you can prioritize like what is the loudest / most profitable product in the company. And but it's not optional doing this, unfortunately. It is as important, if not more important, than creating another component.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. The idea that addressing misconceptions is not an optional thing. I do think it's really easy for folks to feel overwhelmed with just all the asset design and development work. Like, we need more components, that mentality, when in truth, that's probably a third of the work, and there's all this other stuff that we need to be thinking about. So this is a great reminder. Yeah, this is awesome, Guy. Thank you so much for taking a few minutes to kind of recap this with me. I always enjoy our conversations and your insights, and I appreciate the perspective you bring, Guy. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you for setting all this up.
Cheers.